Now let's consider the career of William Henry Fox Talbot, the inventor of positive negative photography. William Henry Fox Talbot was a British gentleman born in 1800 and survived until the 1870s. He patented what came to be called the Calotype process in 1839. In the years prior to that, he had been a member of the Royal Society, meaning that he was a scientist who worked in collaboration and with the recognition of the British government. And he had many scientific pursuits that were related to crystallography, chemistry, and optics before those things came together in his pursuit of photography. In his book, The Pencil of Nature, which we'll look at in a little bit, he describes the process that he was working on as he discovered what would be necessary to capture these images. And he describes in particular the image that you see on the left, which is a leaf that has been, its image has been recorded on photosensitized paper. That paper is sensitized with salts of silver. And we're not going to get into the chemistry of it, but it's important to know that silver is involved and that the silver crystals, the silver interacts with other chemistry to make crystals that are light sensitive and then have to be processed with other chemicals to get that light sensitivity to stop. Then that paper image that comes from certain areas being exposed to light and certain areas being blocked, that becomes a negative that's then used to create positive images. These are early calotype images that Talbot made of some sketches that he had made when he was pursuing crystallography, meaning that he was growing crystals and then shining polarized light through those crystals to study optical effects and characteristics of different light wavelengths. By the photograph on the right, you can see that these calotypes are actually very, very small, and he made them as prints from his sketches. So this is just to reflect that he was studying light and characteristics of light and its interaction with different materials. So by 1835, he has a fairly stable process that he calls photogenic drawings for making contact prints from plant specimens or pieces of cloth. And by 1839, he's able to have developed this process and the fixative process well enough that these images are very, very stable. In this detail view, you can see that these direct contact prints are pretty precise and have a lot of detail to them. The next step that was necessary was to build a camera, a version of a camera obscura that was going to condense light well enough to be able to capture that image that's inside of the camera. These are very, very small cameras. He called them mousetrap cameras because he would make these little cameras, and then they would have to sit outdoors in different parts of his estate and take in these long exposures on these paper negatives that are inside of the cameras. The first successful negative that he was able to achieve with one of these small cameras was of a window in his home in Lacock Abbey, and that's what you see here. The actual negative, the little paper negative itself, is about the size of a postage stamp. It's very, very small. And this is a photograph of that negative blown up much bigger. He wrote in his notes that he could see the individual panes of glass in that window, and for him, that was a tremendous success. So here you see a negative image as captured from the inside of a camera, and this is from a few years later when the technology was a little bit more highly developed. And then on the right, a print that's made from that negative. You can see that the prints that are made from these calotype negatives are relatively soft in their detail. They capture a lot of detail, but that detail is really softened in comparison to the daguerreotype, for example, where the detail is very, very sharp. It's a fairly contrasty image. It has warm tones, and you lose a lot of the detail in the deep shadows and the highlights. But with that said, you can capture a lot in one of these photographs. And because it uses the positive negative process, you can make multiple copies from it. So this brings us to the Pencil of Nature. Now, the Pencil of Nature was a book that was published as a series of volumes. People subscribed to the Pencil of Nature and would get multiple volumes as he released them over time. So that went from 1844 to 1846 as he released one volume at a time. And the Pencil of Nature included rural scenes, still life arrangements, and many other practical uses for photography. So the Pencil of Nature was published as multiple volumes, and it included both images that he had made and explanations of them. In the Pencil of Nature, Talbot accompanies photographs that he has made with narrative that sometimes explains the technical processes that he went through to create a certain kind of image, or sometimes explains how that use of photography could be practical for one industry or another, or different purposes. In this example, you see a contact print that is made from lace, and in the narrative, he explains the positive negative process and how it's achieved. It's interesting during his time how this relates to industry, because the fact that the photographic process makes a literal, accurate, objective rendering of the lace that's practical for industry. Lace was very costly to make at the time. It was very valuable, and the photograph would record the specific kinds of patterns and the specific kinds of craftsmanship that one shop or another would be able to achieve, and that record would be indisputable. Here's a photograph that was that he made prints of and included in the Pencil of Nature that records a haystack from his large estate at Laycock Abbey. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. He describes the images in the Pencil of Nature, as the title would imply, the Pencil of Nature. He describes them in terms of how they are like, but also different from what we can record with a pencil, what a person could record. So they're like a sketch in that they're capturing what a person could see in front of them, but because it is machinery and chemistry that's capturing these things, it's going to capture all kinds of precise detail in ways that the human hand, and particularly Talbot's human hand, he was embarrassed at how bad he was at drawing, that a person would not be able to capture all of this precise detail with such accuracy. So all of the texture that you see of this haystack, the little lines, the light and shadow that creates this rough and very precise texture would have been very difficult for a person to be able to capture. And the photograph is an image that doesn't necessarily record anything of practical functional value, it's of aesthetic interest. Here's another view from Laycock Abbey, his nice, beautiful country estate. It shows the kind of charm and appeal that people sought in paintings. Now, Talbot did not attempt to present photography as an alternative for art or even a form of art. Those weren't questions that he dealt with. He was just showing how this technology can do things better than, more accurately than what a human hand could do if they were trying to sketch them. He was also interested in how the photographic process could document artworks. So you could get a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional sculpture that was as accurate and faithful to the artist's intent in making the sculpture as it would be possible for a two-dimensional medium to be. And that accuracy was also practical in attempting to document one's collection of fine porcelain or of fine glass. It would be more precise and accurate and indisputable in its recording of fine detail in a way that a handmade sketch is always subject to error. The Pencil of Nature also documented how photography could capture line drawings and manuscripts, things that people had written by hand. They could be copied mechanically now in ways that had never been possible before. Here's a photograph. It's actually two photographs put together, seen in our textbook that documents Talbot and some of his assistants at work. You can see how the cameras that they're working with now by 1846 are much, much larger than what he was working with those little trap cameras that he started with. They're much bigger. The size of the negative determines the size of the prints, and that's what you see over on the right. On the left-hand side, he's taking photographs, and on the right-hand side, you can see people doing exposures in sunlight of the negatives in contact, in direct contact with the photosensitive paper under it. So they're making contact prints, which are then going to be fixed and washed and sold. So to wrap up, this is our key image from William Henry Fox Talbot, the haystack from The Pencil of Nature. It reflects so much of what Talbot was trying to achieve with the calotype and to sell to the public as a technology that had many practical and aesthetic uses. Um, you can see the qualities of the calotype print, the warmth, the warm tone that it has, the sort of contrasty quality of the print that's sort of softened by the darkest tones not being all that dark and being kind of on the brown side. So this is a calotype. The calotypes are also sometimes referred to as salt prints. Those are interchangeable terms. A calotype is more of a technical term, but a salt print is more of a casual term, and both of those describe the same kind of photograph. Essential takeaways from William Henry Fox Talbot. A few points to remember. Talbot patented the calotype process in 1839. It was very, very shortly after Daguerre had announced his patent. So Talbot knew that he had to announce his right away as well. The calotype process was also known as a salt print, and it was the first positive-negative photographic process. Leading up to that, as a member of the Royal Society, Talbot had many scientific pursuits related to crystallography, chemistry, and optics. He published The Pencil of Nature, which documented many possible uses for photography from 1844 to 1846. And Talbot refined the photographic processes on his estate, which was called Laycock Abbey, and that's seen in many of his photographs.